to another episode of The Frustrated CEO. I'm here with two of my favorite colleagues, Patsy Feeman and Patrick Lyons. Today, we're going to talk about short cycle simplified strategic planning and the challenge of executing in a digital world. So let's begin by addressing what do we mean by simplified when it comes to strategic planning. Simplified strategic planning, one of the definitions that people often use is strategy on a page. Now, that's not what we're used to. I remember working in an organization that literally I got handed 3-ring binders, probably 3 of them. That was the strategy. Strategy on a page is challenging because you really have to be laser focused when you're in a strategic planning meeting. So before I say any more, I want to engage Patrick or Patsy or both. Now let's hear a little bit from you about strategic planning that's simplified.
Well, I just want to ask, just for clarity, when you say strategy on a page, are you talking like a week strategy, a month? I mean, because anything beyond that, how the heck am I going to get it down to one page? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about strategy on a page. Like it could be, I guess if cheated, it was 11 by 17.
but like a 3 to 5 year plan.
Yeah. It will include all of those types of things. And that's why we say, and sometimes use the word laser-like strategic thinking, because there is an element of simplicity that's very hard to get to and very valuable.
It reminds me. Go ahead.
Sorry, Patrick. It makes me think, Love, of something I hear us tell clients a lot. Strategy is the art of exclusion.
Yeah.
You have to get down to what is your priorities to be able to put it on one page.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it reminds me of the quote, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter book. You ever heard that one?
Yes.
It can become, right? It can be, it's very easy. If I want to just throw everything in there into a strategy, it becomes bulky and cumbersome, but it takes requirement, it takes effort and laser-like focus to get that down to one page. That almost seems, that alone, even doing that all when everybody was in one workspace, sounds like it can be complicated. How the heck do you do it in a digital space? And what do you mean when you say in a digital space?
Well, I'm talking about what's happening through the pandemic, really. I'm talking about the fact that many of us are working remote, right? There are digital tools, some of which come easier for people than others, right? Strategic planning, when I think of it in the non-digital world where we're together, we're talking, we're taking breaks, we've got flip charts out, we've got whiteboards up, we're sketching, we're doing things that we're not as able to do right now in this digital world, this remote working world. And, if some of the people are in person and some of the people are not in person, which is likely to happen, well, how is that going to help us in terms of simplified strategic planning?
Got it.
You just triggered a thought for me. So a long time ago, I wrote a children's book and I sent it off to the editor. And what I got back in red ink was almost, 85% scratched out. And I'm like, how can you expect me to write this children's book with that much already off the table? I was shocked. And then I realized that this editor was brilliant. And we got the book to the right number of words and the right number of pages. And it was easier as a read to your children. And it was more powerful than all the other words that I had originally submitted. So if that helps at all, that's what I think of when I think of simplified strategic planning.
Perfect. Thank you.
Right. I also think that there's an audience, and the audience is the organization that's going to figure out how to execute on the plan. And if it is that simplified, and I know what my contribution is and what I'm doing is going to help us execute on that plan, it's probably because it's simplified and not overly complex.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of middle managers lately that are starting to look at the simplified strategic plan of their organization. They can hold it and see it on one page, but they also get excited about it because it's simple enough to communicate it and they can like own it. So that is a great way of getting to the right audience or including your entire audience. So
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. And look, here's the other thing. We go into strategic planning mode with people, we're consultants, and too often, at least early on, before we got more rigorous about it, we were really in an operational review and it wasn't strategic. So the other thing about a simplified approach to strategic planning is we're focusing on, you're putting your strategic thinking hat on. Yeah, there's data that needs to be reviewed, but an operational review that says, oh, okay, we did 10 million last year. I think we can do 10% more. So that's our number. That's not strategic planning. So a simplified strategic plan. So let's talk about some of the things it includes. One of the things that we're often shocked by, or at least startled by, is the number of organizations that haven't articulated core values. Or they have them, but they were written so long ago and they're not a living, breathing part of the organization, or in this case, the simplified strategic plan, that we have work to do right there, right? So including core values. And here's the other thing that we notice. How strategic is a core value if there's no definition of behavior, right? It's not very useful, really. It sounds like, okay, here's a word, choose your word, integrity. But what do we mean by that? How can I execute on that if that's part of the strategy of behavior, the behavior element of our organization?
I think that's an important point to make, because without the behaviors, and I'm not talking about a definition, you're not talking about a definition either, but without the behaviors, if you've got 100 people in your organization and a core value of the business is integrity, you're leaving it up to 100 different people to define that in their own way. Even if you give them the definition, you're leaving it up to 100 different people to figure out how does my day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month work. How do I perform it in a way that meets that definition? And I think what you're talking about are specific behaviors that I might see, or that you as a CEO, that you would want in your organization, that would bring that value to life. So it's not a definition. It's 3 to 5 critical key behaviors that you would expect to see. So I don't know, Lev, I'll put you on the spot for integrity, or maybe another value. Give an example. What are maybe some of the behaviors that different from a definition that might bring a value to life, to help a CEO who's listening who may not know what we're talking about?
That's a really good question. Integrity is a tough one, right? Because and what if you have 1,000 people in your organization?
Mm.
You know, but if it's simplified and you want people, so if you wrote a treatise on integrity, that doesn't necessarily help you understand. So you're on a sales team, how to behave under certain circumstances. So if it boiled down to honesty under fire, and this is
That's
top of mind, right?
yeah.
It's honesty under fire. No matter what is happening, we're honest. Ah! Okay, so honesty under fire with cell phones popping. Um, if you're a customer on the customer service team, and it's tough, or maybe someone calls in and they're upset. Let's use whatever the other value that uh, might talk about servant leadership or service, and you have a treatise about service, it's not going to be helpful. in executing on your strategy and having your core values be a part of that. Is that what you were getting to, Patrick?
Yeah. I think it's a great example, right? One that comes to mind for me in integrity, a behavior would be no surprises to the customer, right? That if I'm a CEO and I want to make sure that our customers are never surprised, that they're never the last ones to know about something, then I would call that out as a behavior that brings the value of integrity to life. That way, everybody in my organization knows it's not just about saying and doing the right things. It's, hey, here's what integrity looks like here. It means we've got to improve our communication. We've got to, get to the customer early so that there are never any surprises, because that's what integrity looks like here in this organization. So just an example, but yeah.
It's a good example. And here's the other thing. We use the word core in front of values, right? We've walked into organizations, you've all seen them, you've walked in, sometimes they're even in the reception room and there's someone at a desk, or at least previously, and there's values stated. Well, 12 values is hard to handle, but what's at the core? What's at the core for the leaders or from the CEO of that organization that really matters? And so if you can get them down to 5, or you can get them down to 6, or you set some limit for no more than, then you're going to have that kind of a conversation in simplified strategic planning that challenges that to the core. And then it gives people something they can actually work with. Now, the same is true for core purpose. That asks the question of, well, why do we exist? What fundamentally is at the core? And does that matter in terms of strategy? You bet it does. Why do we exist? So that will be covered in simplified strategic planning. That may also attract or help people say, that's not an organization I want to work for, or that is an organization I want to work for. If we exist to extract precious metals out of the earth through the creation of giant mining facilities in precious land in Utah, I may not want to work for that organization, or I may get excited about it.
Well, and we can go beyond just we can just go beyond the people working there. It's like, do I want to do business with that company?
Yeah, exactly.
Do I want to have partnerships with that company? We can go, so it does become a decision, an opportunity to make decisions.
Right. And then you get into things like strategic initiatives. Again, what are we talking about? There's usually a lot of initiative writing that happens. There's usually a lot of sifting through initiatives. These are things we could do. We could do this and we could do that and we could do this, but what's strategic? And again, how many can we actually execute on? When I received those 3-ring binders, it was very obvious right from the get-go that somewhere between 10 and 30% of all that was going to get executed upon.
Isn't that what the statistics suggest, that a high number of strategic plans never get fully implemented, and an even higher number a high number never get implemented, and an even higher number get fully implemented? So it's a very small percent, which is, right. I think it lends credibility to what you're saying. It's why don't put 20 things on there. Don't put more than don't sign the organization up for more than it can handle, because then in essence, you're setting them up to fail. So Leb, what's the right number? What's the right number of strategic initiatives in a simplified strategic plan?
Again, a really good question, but I'd say definitely no more than 6. Maybe 4 or 5 if we're really being realistic. Mm-hmm. And here comes the other part. In the way we've experienced and offer simplified strategic planning, you have to prioritize. What's number 1 of all of those? And then the other thing is really important and often missed, even in those 3-ring binders, who owns it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And owning doesn't mean that one person does it. Owning means it's going to get done, and I own that.
Can you have more than one owner?
Well, it's not recommended.
Right.
That was a big sigh.
I'll put it that way. Um, yeah, occasionally that might work or might be required, but no, generally it's like, okay, I own this. This is, and there's, I have to engage people, whatever, it may be very cross-functional, but there is an owner and there is a strategic initiative, and I know what number one is. And even better, perhaps, is if they're all ranked. Like if there's five, it's what's number one, what's number two, what's number three, what's number four, what's number five.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is they come with timelines. Oftentimes what we'll see is the initiatives are defined as a first, an annual initiative with then a rock or a goal or something that we want to get accomplished within the first quarter. And that those get tracked. So the last thing I say for now is simplified strategic planning. Planning on a page is really cool. It's not easy, but it is also very easy to offer to the rest of your organization. But it brings up the question of trust, because you want to be able to trust your employees to take this work and keep it as a guideline and as a motivation, and uh, not to be shared with your competitors, right? Not to be, oh, this is so simple. uh, I think I'll post it on Facebook, or I'm the owner of this particular strategic initiative. Isn't that cool? So, there's guidelines, and there's a certain amount of, it probably ties back to your values.
So you're recommending that after our listener creates or pulls a team together to create a strategic plan, you're recommending that that plan be shared with everybody in the organization?
At least most of it.
Yeah.
The sensitive part that some people share and some people don't share uh, is usually in the realm of the financial elements. And there can be good reason for that. It really varies. But ideally, this goes back to like Jack Stack and sharing the numbers, 20, 25 years ago. People love to understand not only in what they do, but how the organization profits from the work that they do, the contribution they make, and the difference that they make, and the financial goals of the organization, and whether we're hitting them or not. I remember consulting in a really large, throughout the entire United States veterinary organization, and they had their goals and their thermometers up in the most public place that everybody had to walk by, and people checked. Some of it was because it was exciting, some of it was because it was daunting, some of it was because it was there, and some of it was because we're going to be incentivized if we hit those goals. And they're visual, and it really worked. So what else? Anything else you want to share or say about simplified strategic planning? Um,
There's two things that come to mind. And so if you as the CEO and your senior team have created this strategic plan, one word is communicate. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Lab was just talking about a visual way of communicating. We see over and over, the more people can either have access to the one page or have it in the organization somewhere, then that's a living document. So the other word that comes to mind is organic. We're going to get into execution, I think, in just a minute with Lab around execution. And when you start to execute, your strategic plan becomes organic because you're constantly finding out new information, which then needs to be communicated again. So when we work with companies, it's like communicate, 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 and learn from the experience. So those are two things that come to my mind.
Yeah. So my mind goes to the tools or the systems that are available. So I think the two that are dominating the business space today, and there are more, but the two that come to mind for simplified strategic planning are EOS, traction, right? Those one and the same. And then there's scaling up. And I think so. I typically use scaling up more with my clients. And I do it because it has a bit more of the culture component. I believe you guys do as well, because it has more of the it not forces, but it encourages the culture component more than EOS. But the fact is, it's kind of like, I think we've talked about this in a previous episode, that after this major study that was done on what's the best project management tool, and the outcome was whichever one you're going to use. And so whatever the right tool is, it's less about the tool and it's more about taking the time to be strategic, to have that laser focus, the art of exclusion, Patsy, that you said, and then really committing to it, sharing it down through the organization. As you're learning more information, having it be organic and a living, breathing documents, all those things. It's really just committing to it. Because one of my favorite sayings is there's no ROI in strategic planning. So it's important, but the ROI really comes when you execute, when you're actually crossing things off lists and checking boxes. And we know that's one of the things that frustrates CEOs the most. It's when things aren't getting done.
Sure. And that just triggers us back to, well, what was the title of this? This was called short cycle strategic planning. And so why are we using the term short cycle? And I think what we're seeing is, certainly with our clients, is that with the pandemic, with all the change, with the change in administration of the country, with things like global supply chain issues, et cetera, this cycle for keeping your strategic plan relevant is shorter. And so people are saying, yeah, it used to be a kind of a one and done. Let's meet in December and do strategic planning, and we'll see how we did it in December of the next year. Well, that just doesn't apply right now. So we're also talking about short cycle. So what are we seeing from the clients that we're working with right now? Some of what we're seeing is that people are definitely at least doing pretty thorough quarterly reviews of their strategy and how they're executing on their strategy. But we're also seeing organizations that are doing it as quick cycle as a weekly, because that's how much things are changing. We're working with an organization right now that depends on the global supply chain. And the costs of moving things right now have skyrocketed. And then there are delays. There are ships coming in with containers and they're coming into ports, and there's not enough workers. So there's not enough dock workers, and it leads to demurrage fees and other issues that you can't necessarily plan for, unexpected. So if you're not agile, if you're not, as Patsy said, communicate, communicate, communicate. Everyone's communicating with each other because they know what the plan is. And then there are adjustments that are being made. You can really get caught. So we're mentioning that because we think that this is probably here to stay for a while. Comments?
Yeah, I think that, well, I wholeheartedly agree. And we're all seeing the same thing, that, just think about what comes to mind at the end of 2019, how many organizations created their 2020 strategic plan?
Right.
Whether it was simplified or not, they created a strategic plan. And then 3 months later, across the globe, everything shuts down and everybody has to go virtual. Everybody has to go, social distancing, and employees working from home. And without the ability to come back to the table on a regular basis and adjust the plan, and I heard this from companies that would say, well, in February, we scrapped our plan and it was just survival mode for the rest of the year. We just spent the rest of 2020 surviving. And, I'd say with everything that happened in 2020, that is an accomplishment. And there were other companies who were meeting rhythmically and working on that strategic plan and just adjusting. Okay, the plan is still a good plan, or maybe some parts of the plan aren't a good plan in a virtual space. So what do we need to do to adjust? How do we need to, but let's not scrap it and just make things up for the next 10 months. How do we incorporate the new data and refresh? So I think you're right. I think it's here to stay. I think even beyond the pandemic, I just think it's good business practice that the world economy and the markets and the customer needs and wants are changing so frequently that if you're doing it on an annual basis, I think sometimes that your plan is already out of date after 3 months. So now to wait a year to refresh it, you're really asking for you're just going to miss opportunities. That's all.
Well, and this circles back to one of the components Lev was talking about in creating a simplified strategic plan is core values and purpose. So that becomes your compass. And what we're talking about here, even in a 3-month adjustment, is not easier to do, but can be done in a more easy fashion when you stay aligned with your core values and your purpose. That's what I'm seeing more and more.
Yep, totally agree. And so let's assume that the simplified strategic plan has been communicated, it's done, it's good, and there is a good meeting rhythm. Now we have to look at, what we have to execute on the plan. Right? That's why Patrick said there's no ROI in strategic planning. A good plan, and I'm sure there are plenty of good plans that haven't been well executed.
Yep.
So now we're talking about the challenge of executing in what I'm referring to as a digital world. Refer to it as remote, refer to it as people aren't around a water cooler talking to each other, but maybe they're doing something like that on Zoom. And we need to execute. We're not together yet. Even when I'm together with people and there's masks on, there's something kind of in the way. So what are some of the obvious challenges? What are you seeing, Patrick? What are you seeing, Patsy? And then we'll get into some of the less obvious challenges.
Yeah. So I guess what I see, the obvious one is the technology limitations that people have. Right? And people, they weren't hired to do these jobs from home, so they may not necessarily have had the setups, right? They may not have had high-speed internet connections at home to be able to jump on meetings and have those be effective. They may not have even a private workspace at home. So there's just the technology and the logistics piece of trying to execute in a virtual space. That's challenging. But the other part is I have a client right now that a significant part of their intellectual property goes back. It's literally 30 years of drawings of different parts and configurations. And it sits on a library. It sits on a shelf in a physical library in the office. And for a long time, they've talked about wanting to put this information into a cloud type space so that people would have access to it on the road. But that's usually an initiative you would see in a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. Suddenly, the whole sales force is virtual because of the pandemic, and yet these drawings sit on a shelf in a library in a physical building. And they're struggling to make sure that information is available. So it's accelerating the need to get that information into a cloud. But that's just one example for a business trying to execute a strategic plan. Do your digital employees your virtual employees have access to the information that they need in order to do the job that you're asking them to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so much of the time, teams, when you do get together or when you can get together in person for execution, it's playing off each other, it's inquiring, it's advocating. So there's a lot of back and forth. And even a year into our Zoom world, learning how to do that effectively to get input from everybody that's on your execution team is still a challenge. So that's another place I'm seeing that we haven't learned how to utilize Zoom or whatever platform we're using to really get people's input.
I think, just leaders need to be more intentional and not forget to reach out to everybody in their virtual workspace and to share. I mean, Patsy, well, you and Lev both have said communicate. That's hard when you're all in one physical location, right? There are organizations that struggle to do that even when everybody's under one roof. Now put everybody under 50 roofs or 500 roofs, and it's not as easy as just sending out an email, because sometimes people don't read it. Sometimes people don't absorb it the same way. They may read it, but they may not understand it. And so it just, the communication aspect becomes it just becomes exponentially more difficult.
Absolutely. Well, there are a lot of other obvious challenges. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the less obvious challenges. Some organizations have been growing in the pandemic. And so, one of the less talked about, but starting to be much more talked about, is onboarding new team members in an organization when people can't get together, or the office is closed, or the corporate building is not available at the moment. How do we effectively onboard new team members, new talent? And I think if I was to say one word about something that wrapped up a whole other area for me, it's fatigue. We're learning how, especially for some people, what's your tolerance for the number of hours you can spend on Zoom? What's your tolerance for the number of hours you can spend on a particular Zoom meeting? And so there's this whole learning curve around fatigue, and some of it really leads to team members who feel isolated. And how do we help with that? I've seen people who are actually taking it even further, and they're just admitting, I feel depressed. And is it safe to talk about that? Who do I talk? Who do I talk to about that? Do I look up and do I get on another Zoom meeting with someone in HR? How do I deal with that? So that, we're seeing some of that. We're seeing people who just get really frustrated. Depending on your type style, if you're a people person and you're on Zoom all the time, you're not getting your cup full, and you're just longing to get back and be with people. And if you're more introverted or highly introverted, this may be just working.
You're loving this.
My sister is highly introverted. She is doing fine. She feels creative. She just doesn't care in the same way that my other sister cares, who is highly emotional and extroverted, and just, this is hard. And I think there is at this point in time a little less obvious, and I don't know how people are exactly talking about it, and certainly in a group, but what does the future hold for us? And again, if you're a leader and you're leading a team and you're on Zoom, are you all about the business? I remember in the very beginning of the pandemic, it was like, okay, man, everybody's got to still work 8 to 5. There's going to be, no interruptions. You're going to be, just as productive as you were before. And then, there's dogs barking in the background, and there's maybe your children running around, and you're trying your best to work, and it's hard, uh,
Or you're in the
And
laundry room, or I mean, it's like I
yeah.
keep finding people temporary offices in some of the most interesting places. So I'm like, are you in a closet? Yes.
Yeah, I actually saw a piece where a guy built a stage in his closet. He's
Let's
a
see.
performing artist, and he started figuring out how to perform in the closet and hang himself from the bar that used to house his clothes. And he's actually successful, but that's an exception. Um, it's a very different experience for introverts and extroverts. It's a very different experience for those who grew up with and are feeling facile with technology and those who aren't. Um, and we just have to remember that the business is executed by people, and we may all be in this together, but we're all in this differently. We're diverse. We're have different needs. So I'll close with this and just let's keep rolling with it if you have other thoughts. But I think there's a great need for psychological safety to be intentional. Because the other thing is, it's pretty easy to not know exactly how to speak up or share something that cuts across the grain or something you disagree with. And if we're just jumping into Zoom meetings, whatever it is, Microsoft Teams, whatever the platform is, and the leader or the team hasn't addressed how they're going to interact with each other, and that it's safe to cut across the grain. It's safe to share. Frustrated, I'm so tired I can't think right now. Um, then we're going to have some difficulty executing and staying whole and healthy and together.
I would agree. I think that's safety to say whatever needs to be said, to show up however I'm feeling. I mean, it is hard. It's the point you made is really important for our listener to understand that we are all going through this together, but we're all experiencing it differently. And I was actually on an all staff call with a client about a month ago, and we were just doing a quick check-in and just to start the meeting. And for the most part, everybody was pretty good. And then when it was one particular employee's turn to do her check-in, she turned the camera off and started to speak with the camera off. And it was because she was overwhelmed and the emotions started to overtake her. And so there were tears as she was speaking. And and I found out later that's a common thing that happens with this particular employee on this particular team. I didn't know that in the meeting, but I actually and I don't usually interrupt, but I asked her to put the camera on just to share that with us, right? It's powerful, and so that she would know, hey, this is a safe place for you to show up real and authentic and honest. And it was a little bit of a risk, and I checked in afterwards to make sure she wasn't angry or didn't hate me, but she appreciated it. But I think that's the point is, people need to know that it's okay to not be okay. And just that alone, that there's something healing and cathartic about that, just for people. So I don't have to pretend I'm holding it all together. These are the people I work with. These are the I care about these people. This is the company that I work. This is my boss. If I can show up real and authentic here and not have to pretend 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, then it's just a little easier, right? There's less shame and embarrassment about it, and it doesn't. It somewhat diffuses the
Yeah.
issue. That makes sense. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm. Yeah.
Yeah. It really
Makes a lot of
does.
sense. Yeah. I'd also add, as you as this, the CEO, to be mindful of some of these pieces, mindful of the fatigue piece, mindful of that people are in an emotional state, mindful that we're working in home environments, and start to set a few parameters or guidelines. I've talked to a number of employees who have 2 years olds running around and they're working more hours than they ever have. because they don't have that 5 o'clock time where they leave the office and come home. So it's really bleeding into their work lives, I mean, in their home lives in a way that's it's not supporting the whole person.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. So now we're going to go into this section of what we always do on the Frustrated CEO podcast and talk about. So let's get practical. Okay. What are we offering? What are we suggesting? What we're suggesting is several things. One is set an appropriate meeting rhythm to review your strategic plan. And this is true whether we were going through a pandemic or working remotely or not. Involve more people in the strategic planning process than you think you normally would. Because again, your people have insights to things that maybe the leadership team doesn't have. We're working remotely, so it's kind of a level playing field in a way. There's not a differentiation in, the C-suite and the offices they have, and the mid range or whatever, however you look at it hierarchically. But we're in a level playing field right now if we're on a Zoom meeting. Um, and recognize, it's often harder to create simplicity than it is to create complexity. So I'm going to say that one more time. It's often harder to create simplicity than it is to create complexity. So be willing to take a look at that and allow for that simplicity, especially in the midst of so much change, is actually really helpful to people and helpful to your plan and helpful to your ability to execute. Um, and make sure that everybody knows that what they're doing matters and that they can see the connection between what they do and how we're winning with our plan and being successful. It's certainly a time to honor and recognize differences in style, in thinking, and backgrounds. And right now, the home working environment that people, whatever challenges that they face, may be very different. And Patsy, what you said is like, so I'm working from home. Does that mean I'm done at 5, or do I take a lunch? I mean, if it's never been talked about, um, talk about it.
Yep.
Let's be practical with that. Help people, um, and be intentional. Set up a safe space for people to communicate. We use something called the safety net exercise. So we'll be happy to share or talk about that with you. But um, just recognizing that this isn't going through these kinds of changes it's emotional. We're emotional beings, and we don't want to ignore that. So set up a safe space and use appreciation way more frequently than you might have ever used it before. It just helps. It's nice to know that somebody notices that you delivered on something, or that you did something really well, or that you look healthy today. I'm not feeling healthy, or whatever, so using stated appreciation is the way we talk about it. And recognize not only is it okay to have some fun in this environment, it's probably a really good idea. And however you do that, and however you define that, and however, a goofy or ungoofy, or, TED talky or video clip wise, you do that, do it. So others, anything else before we close today?
I'll add one, and it's we had talked earlier about the importance of the core values, but more importantly than just determining what the core values are, it's going the added step. What are those 3 to 5 behaviors that would bring that value to life here? So what does integrity look like in this organization? What does family look like in this organization? What does communication look like in this organization, and its behaviors that that are not abstract, but very concrete and real, and things that our employees would understand. It means, so what are those behaviors? I just think it's a critical piece of not just bringing the values to life, but then it enables you, as we've talked about, to use it as the litmus test, as the lens or the foundation for a strategic plan and for execution.
That's great. That's great. So we're going to close for now. We want to thank you for listening. Go to the Frustrated CEO if you'd like to download anything about today's Let's Get Practical. And we'll be hoping you are with us the next time.
That's it.
Night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.